Honestly, when I hear some people talk about their brains, I hear a mentality much like those days of the women talking about their bodies back in the 90s. It sounds like they're punishing their brains because they don't like how it works. They're trying to force it to work differently because it doesn't work like everyone else's. Like, my brain is the enemy. If I can just make it work right, everything will be fine. But it didn't work back then for our bodies, and it's not working now for our brains either. Welcome to the Love Your Brain podcast, the podcast designed for everyday people who are ready to hop off the negative thought hamster wheel and enjoy a less hostile environment in their own brains. Our brains are where we live our entire lives, and I'm on a mission to help people see that they have everything they need to make it a happier place to be. So join us for this episode of the Love Your Brain podcast. Let's get started. Welcome back to the Love Your Brain podcast, or welcome if you're new. Today, we are going to be doing a bit of work on our relationship with our own brains. And maybe that's not something that you've spent a lot of time doing, but I do think it's important. And we're going to get into why that is today. Now, often when I'm having a conversation with someone about their mental health or struggles that they're having with their thought life and things that are going on in their brains, I often hear a narrative that has a bit of a negative connotation to it. They'll express things like anger or frustration with how their brains are working, whether that's because they're having anxious thoughts, depressive thoughts, or just some negative self talk going on in their brain. Whatever it is, I often will hear them say, I hate how my brain does this or that, or why can't my brain just work like everyone else's? Or I've even heard a new popular exercise on the internet where people will suggest that you give your brain a nickname just so you can basically talk negatively to it as if your brain is separate from you. So, for example, someone might say their brain's name is Bertha, and when they get upset with how their brain is working, they'll be like, Bertha, you're wrong, shut up. Or, Bertha, I'm not listening to you today, you're a liar. Or even just that, I hear people say, your brain is lying to you, like it's some kind of empowering phrase or exercise. But I don't often see this get the result that people are looking for. Now, I do think it can be helpful to observe what our brains are doing, kind of take a step back and take a look at how our brain is operating. But I don't think that it necessarily needs to have a negative connotation to it all the time. And in fact, I think sometimes when we create that dynamic, the negative exchange with how our brain's operating can actually be somewhat detrimental. But if this is sounding really far-fetched, let me start by comparing it to something that might resonate with you more, at least something maybe that you've heard about. Now, I personally am someone that grew up in the 80s and 90s, and during that time, when it came to our physical bodies, it was all about no pain, no gain, especially when it came to like getting in shape and being fit and being healthy, quote unquote healthy. Now, women in particular were constantly trying to be as thin, as tiny as possible. And if they weren't thin enough, they were starving themselves on weird processed, non fat foods, weird fad diets like the cabbage soup diet, where it was all about starving yourselves as much as possible for as long as possible until you just give up and eat all the things again, gain the weight back, and then just do another crash diet. Or people were just doing hours and hours of cardio, trying to burn away the calories that they consumed, anything that they could do to just get smaller. Because that was the idea of beauty at the time, is the tinier you were, the more beautiful you were. And as someone who grew up in that culture, I have so much appreciation for where our culture has evolved to today. It's much more today about loving our bodies as they are, treating them well because they deserve it, because our bodies are valuable tools for us. It's much less about looking a specific way, but more so about embracing who you are and your own uniqueness. We're leaning into eating well for our bodies because it fuels them instead of restricting all our foods to make our bodies look a certain way. And science has discovered so much during this time between the 80s and 90s and today. Like, for example, we found that women with actually little to no fat on their bodies can't actually have a menstrual cycle, which means they can't actually have babies. So, there are benefits to having a little bit of fat on your body. Being zero fat on your body doesn't always serve everyone's purposes. So much has changed over the decades in terms of how we see our bodies and how we treat our bodies. Now, obviously, there's a long way to go, but I think we've made a lot of progress in that area. And even the media has gotten better about pushing like less cardio 24/7 just to get smaller and burn calories. And now they're talking a lot more about how building strength is so important so you can live a full life. It's not just about burning calories, but it's about building strength. So many things about this mentality have evolved, and I can get on board with that. And maybe you can too. Maybe when you hear this, you're like, yes, yes, that sounds great. Seeing how we've evolved from punishing and hating our bodies, trying to change them to look a certain way to where we are today, where people are much more about loving and caring for our bodies because we value them and we see how they serve us in our day to day lives. That doesn't mean no one is trying to get healthy anymore, right? It's just the approach is changing. It's changing from this negative, forced perspective to a more positive one. People are still getting healthier, maybe a little bit slower, but hopefully with changes that are more long lasting and more meaningful. And this is what I hope to see soon in the mental health arena as well. I would love to see more people working on their brains and their mental health from a place of love and care and less from a place of forced change and negative self talk. Because part of the switch we saw happen with our relationship with our bodies over the decades has to do with our relationship to ourselves, appreciating ourselves and our own unique bodies, and doing things that serve our bodies well, instead of just punishing them because we found. Honestly, that doesn't really work well, right? Our bodies don't respond well when they're constantly punishing them for being a certain way. And when we harm our relationship with ourselves, with our relationship with food, and we were punishing ourselves. What we saw in the 80s and 90s is it just made people do these crazy yo yo diets and actually impact their health negatively. And it didn't really create a lot of health stability. It was always just jumping from one extreme to the other. And this is the switch I would love to see evolve in the mental health space. Just like that, moving from this forced negative perspective to a more positive one where we're embracing our brains. I think for a long time, people have seen their uniqueness as bad. Things like having a brain that works differently than others has been seen as bad. Even things like anxiety, depression, schizophrenia. I don't care the diagnosis. If your brain operates differently than others, it doesn't need to be something that you're trying to force change upon constantly. Your brain's not broken. That's just how your brain is operating right now. Your brain doesn't need to look and feel, quote unquote, like a normal brain, whatever that might actually be. Every brain has ways of functioning that we can actually appreciate parts of, even the parts that are hard to embrace at times. A lot of those ways that our brains have functioned have actually happened over time to help us, to serve us in certain situations. Think about something like PTSD, post traumatic stress disorder. For example, that is something where people experience a very traumatic event and it leaves this very significant imprint on their brain. And when things that happen in the future, as they're going about life, maybe they experience something that's even the slightest bit reminiscent of that previous event that caused that trauma, it can trigger a stress response, even when it doesn't seem warranted, even if it's the smallest thing. But in fact, what the brain is doing there is it thinks it's protecting you. It's like, hey, the last time you felt something like this was really traumatic. So I'm going to sound the alarm in your brain just to make sure that doesn't happen again. It's trying to quickly and efficiently help you to avoid discomfort. It is annoying, sure, and honestly traumatic in its own way. And does it affect your ability to enjoy some parts of your life? Probably. But also, is that the way that your brain is coping? And it's found this method to try and keep you away from harm? Yes. So if we can start from that place, from a place of seeing how our brains function today as a way of helping us to be safe, to be efficient, seeing how our brains are helping to serve us, that might be able to help us see a little bit more of its value. This is also true in the brain's own uniqueness. Your brain's ability to think the ways that it does are usually pretty unique to you and the experiences that you've had in your lifetime. Its functioning is actually a reflection of all of your life's experiences. And although some parts of that might be really, really difficult, it makes you who you are. It tells the story of your life. I always tell people I work with strong arming anything usually is not the most helpful. Either it creates change that doesn't stick because you're having to apply too much external pressure to make it happen, or sometimes by forcing something, you may actually be causing damage. And that's definitely what we saw a lot of in the diet culture of the 80s and 90s, right? Instead, though, if we can approach working with our brains and our bodies by seeing their value and doing things to take care of our brains because we appreciate them so much, that is where the shift needs to happen. This mentality will help our brains to feel safe enough to change over time instead of feeling like we're strong arming the brain into working differently overnight. Honestly, when I hear some people talk about their brains, I hear a mentality much like those days of the women talking about their bodies back in the 90's. It sounds like they're punishing their brains because they don't like how it works. They're trying to force it to work differently because it doesn't work like everyone else's. Like my brain is the enemy. If I can just make it work right, everything will be fine. But it didn't work back then for our bodies, and it's not working now for our brains either. What it does is it creates unhealthy habits and an unhealthy relationship. So, what I would like to challenge you on today is to listen on how you develop thoughts about your own brain. So, when you are having something, say like anxious thoughts, maybe you start to feel frustrated because you're like, oh, this is happening again. I hate it when my brain does this. What the heck? Brain, I just hate the way you do this. Totally valid. Frustration is fine, anger is fine, but it's all about the approach, right? What if we approached this scenario a little bit differently? Like, man, I wonder why my brain is doing this. Like, how did it get to a point where it took me on this trail? Approaching it with curiosity and care to see where it leads you. Maybe it will uncover a more deeply rooted issue that you can start addressing over time. Usually, our brains will slowly start to uncover the areas that do need a bit more attention, a little bit more care, and a little bit more concern. And that's where we can make really powerful shifts. Or here's another one that I like to try and ask. How is this thought that I'm having either helping my brain be efficient or keeping me safe? Usually, one of those two things will be at the core of a thought that you're having. And it can help you just appreciate the process your brain is going through in that moment and create some space like, okay, thanks, brain. I appreciate how you're trying to help me right now. And then you can move from there on changing things slowly over time. And honestly, this doesn't have to be super deep either. I tend to be someone personally who is very clumsy at moments. Usually, when I'm just moving way too fast, trying to do too much, at one time, maybe trying to multitask and do a bunch of things because my brain is usually flying in a million different directions. But I often have this experience with my partner where something goofy will happen, where I'll make a mistake because I'm just trying to do too much at once. Like the kind of thing where you see where someone like puts their keys in the refrigerator or something like that. And my partner will find what I did and or maybe they're just watching me and they see this mistake I made and they'll start to laugh. And not in a mean or malicious way at all, but in a genuine, like, this is hilarious way. And it really helps me because in that moment, I'm usually really angry and frustrated at myself for whatever has happened. Like, why the heck did I do that? I'm so frustrated. But when he's laughing, it's like, oh, that's so interesting. Like, that's very contrasting to what I'm feeling right now. And it helps me check with myself in that moment of anger with my own brain. And he always says something like, oh, you're so funny when you do that, or it's so cute how you do that. And I'm like, wait, this irritating thing for me that I did made you laugh or you think it's cute? Maybe it's not all bad. And that's because it's never all bad. Your brain is never all bad. So if you need to hear it from someone else today to believe it for yourself, the way your brain works is not all bad. It's doing what it's doing to serve a purpose. It's unique, it's different. Maybe it frustrates you sometimes, and maybe you want it to operate differently. But if you can just approach it with a little more gentleness and kindness, you might see things turn out a little bit differently over time. Your brain is amazing. However, it operates, whatever diagnosis you have, it makes your brain unique and it's got you to where you are today and it will get you to lots more amazing experiences in the future. It might be hard to believe or to see when you're being too hard on yourself, but if you're someone who has hopped on this embrace and love your body train, this new mentality of the time that we're in now, it might be easier to check in with yourself by remembering those women of the 90s, right? Doing extreme things to themselves to make them smaller, starving themselves, living off of weird low fat foods, doing hours and hours of cardio. Do you really want to be like that 90s version on your brain, where you force it with a strong arm to work the way that you think it should work, to make it work like everybody else's? Or do you want to embrace the brain that you have today and lovingly take care of it to help it start to work the way that you want it to someday? If you are someone who struggles with negative self talk or even just embracing your own mental health diagnosis, I hope this episode helps you give yourself just another perspective to play around with today. Or maybe you've got a friend that you know who's struggling with that. Send this podcast their way, encourage them. And if you haven't noticed, this podcast episode today is a big reason why the podcast is titled what it is, the Love Your Brain podcast. It's because I want everyone to experience this, the freedom of actually appreciating their brain for what it is and working from that place, and hoping that other people will join in on this movement to really change the focus from our brains being broken and not working right to our brains are amazing machines that we can also change. So, how can we do that from a place of love and not from a place of punishment? So, hopefully, this episode has inspired you a bit today. All right. Have a great week, guys. I hope you found something helpful here today on the Love Your Brain podcast. Maybe a laugh or a feeling of validation, or maybe just a few moments to have company while you do your laundry. Whatever you take from it, I hope you enjoyed your time and leave feeling empowered to be more you every day. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss out on the next episode, and leave a review. I'd love to hear what you think. Have a great one.